Hi, this is Pratik Chogli. I'm here in San Francisco at the Hyatt Regency. And I want to do a video today on one of the most important questions that you can ask yourself that will dramatically improve your likelihood of getting in. And that'll prove to be a clarifying question in figuring out what the best path and strategy is for you to optimize your chances of getting in. And that question is really to ask yourself what in your life is negotiable and what isn't. So what I mean by this is that basically, you know, the when you look at the entire law school admissions process, there's really sort of no upper limit in terms of what you can put in and what you can do to improve your odds of getting in. And I think having just really doing a thorough, in-depth look at your life, your goals, your priorities, and so forth, will help you to figure out like what kind of constraints you're operating under, and then that'll sort of allow you to sort of think about what are the limitations, what are the resource constraints, and so forth. And you can then sort of figure out really where to put your energy and your priorities to kind of optimize your odds of getting in. So when I say to ask yourself what's negotiable, I think there are really 5 big areas where this is a live question. So number one is, how much time are you willing to put into the law school admissions process? And here I think it's worth thinking both at a macro and a micro day-to-day level. So at the macro level, when you apply to a top law school, you have to keep in mind that you're competing to some degree with people who have spent not only their whole lives preparing for the law school admissions process, but actually they're benefiting from even more than their own lifetime worth of planning and preparation. And what I mean by that is, in any top law school, you're going to have some percentage of people there whose parents are professors at top law schools, whose parents are law school administrators, or they themselves are alumni of the top schools and have networks and so forth. And so they're basically just the beneficiaries of parenting and having parents who are very familiar with the process and have been sort of helping their kids prepare. You're also dealing with some percentage of people who basically realize at a very young age that they want to go to law school, and they've been reading and thinking about this for a long time. And then on a more micro level, there's if you just think about every single day, you have 24 hours in the day, and if you think about it, in theory, you could be spending the vast majority of it doing things to improve your likelihood of getting into law school, whether that means preparing for the LSAT, doing more homework, developing relationships with your professors, pursuing activities outside of law school that might help your application, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think it's really worth sort of both at that macro and micro level, just really honestly looking at how much time you're willing to put into the process. And then once you have a clear idea of that, then you can begin to think about what are the highest leverage areas that you should spend your time. The second is money. So how much money are you willing to spend on the law school admissions process? Now, sort of the extreme kind of outer end of this line of thinking is that there are some people who are willing to basically buy their way into top law schools by making just really large donations. So that's sort of one path that's available potentially. But even if you're not willing to go that far, the more money that you're willing to spend on the law school admissions process broadly, the more that you're likely to get in. I think it's that simple. So what do I mean by that? You can use the more sort of discretionary money you have, the more you can, for example, spend money on courses and tutors to help with LSAT preparation. the more that you can, for example, spend on a law school admissions consultant who will sort of mentor and coach you through the process and give you feedback. You can also spend money on different experiences that might help you to develop a better application process. That might mean, for example, maybe taking a job that doesn't pay well, but that will give you interesting experiences. Or it might mean spending money to travel, which might give you a broader array of perspectives and experiences. Like one classmate of mine at Yale, before she got into law school, she was traveling around the Middle East, and I don't even know the exact story, but I know that she somehow or the other found herself spending the night in a Syrian women's prison, and so that obviously gave her quite a bit of fodder to write an admissions essay that helped her get in. So there, it might mean really investing money in like courses, maybe taking a writing course that might help you to become not only a better student but write a better essay. I mean, there's no limit on where you can be spending money on the process. Number 3 is mobility. How much and where are you willing to move? And this might be a live question in several ways. If you're an undergrad, it might mean sort of thinking about, are you willing to transfer to another school where there might be an advantage? When you're thinking about employment opportunities, both during your summers in college and then after, are you willing to move abroad, or are you willing to move to maybe a rural part of the country, or sort of an urban area, or just somewhere random where sort of not too many other people applying will have the same experience, or so forth. It might also involve how much you're willing to commute. Are you willing to sort of work in one city, live in another, etc. That kind of thing. So that's a big one to think about. Okay, number 4 is, this one is complicated, but it may actually be the most important one, and that is how much are you willing to change? And what I mean by that is that when you're applying to schools that have just a very, very low acceptance rate, and there are a lot of applicants for a few number of spots, you're really in a fairly intense competitive game, and it's going to take a lot out of you. And just like an Olympic athlete has to really change to become better and better, just like a musician or whoever else just really has to change as a person to be able to compete and perform at a high level, I think that very much applies to the law school admissions game as well. And this is, I think, going to require potentially just really taking a hard, critical look at yourself and making a lot of changes. And that might be changes to your work ethic. It might be changes to your mindset and your mentality. It might mean changes to your health regime. It might mean changes in terms of who you associate with and hang out with. It might be changes to your peer group. And really, I think if you do this sort of law school admissions process in a rigorous, serious way, I think it's all but inevitable that you're going to change as a person. And some people are comfortable with change and growth, and other people aren't. And I think really sort of just examining yourself, looking at what you're naturally good at, where you might have weaknesses, and then just really thinking about how much are you willing to change and what are you willing to do to get there, I think is really, really critical. And then number 5, I think, is how much of an opportunity cost are you willing to incur to get into a top law school? And so the reality is that the more you put into the law school admissions process, on the one hand, the more likely you are to get in, but that also means that that you're also missing out on many other things. I mean, I have in other words, I mean, the trade-offs that you have to make to every time that you spend sort of energy or time or money or whatever on law school admissions is time, energy, money, resources you're not spending doing other things. And I have absolutely no doubt that there are people who, by making the decision to aim to get into top law school, they're like, whether they know it or not, I mean, they're foregoing the option to start a business that might make a lot of money. They're foregoing opportunities to spend time with their family or friends or pursuing relationships. They're probably sort of foregoing many opportunities just to be healthier, both physically and emotionally. They're missing out on maybe creative experiences. They might be missing out on different academic opportunities. I mean, I think a lot of people, when you're thinking about law school admissions, you sort of have to maybe be more selective in the kind of courses that you take in college or the kind of extracurriculars you pursue. And so really thinking about what are you willing to give up? And I think you always have to keep in mind here that some percentage of the people who you're competing against have basically decided that getting into a top law school is effectively their life's purpose and mission. It's the number one priority, and they're willing to do whatever it takes. But really sort of being honest with yourself and figuring out how important it is to you, I think will be very critical. So again, the big theme here is to ask yourself what in your life is really negotiable and what isn't. What are the array of choices that are available to you and what aren't? How much do you really want this? And then once you figure those questions out, that's really, I think, the beginning of then figuring out where there are resource constraints and where you have to prioritize, how to be efficient, and how, what inputs in your situation will lead to the highest returns in terms of law school admissions. And this is definitely an exercise I recommend spending time on, but it's also definitely worth finding peer groups, finding mentors, finding advisors, and perhaps hiring a consultant to help you work through the process.